Hello and welcome to another edition of TomBecka.com where, everyone's exceptional. Everyone has a story to tell. And before we get to today's story, I want to let you know the music you're hearing here in the background is from a very good band, Blue House. Blue House with a rent-to-own horns. Friends of mine have an incredible band, and I ought to give them props for allowing me to use this music to start off the shows because they're great musicians, wonderful band, and good people, too. So anyway, so with all that out of the way, let's get to today's podcast. Now, Scuba Steve is a guy who, we have similar backgrounds. He's from Pittsburgh, I'm from Cleveland, both, industrial, rusting cities, and great towns. Well, Cleveland is. Pittsburgh, the Steelers, we joke about that, actually. I'm a Browns fan, he's a Steelers fan. But anyway, one thing we do have an affinity for, one thing we do enjoy is a good dive bar. And he started a blog where he rates the various dive bars in town, and the blog is called hitthatdive.com. At hitthatdive.com is it's a fun little blog where he goes and basically reviews bars that, let's put it this way, that the hoity-toity newspaper wouldn't review. And so we talked about what makes a good dive bar. We talked about what people's attitudes towards alcohol. We talked about a lot of cool things about the people in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, good people, and it's a fun little interview, and I think you'll enjoy the conversation here. But before we get going, I guess the first question is, where'd the name Scuba Steve come from?
Well, the name came, I had a logo done for my website or blog or whatever the heck it is, called Hit That Dive. And a friend of mine, does graphic design, and I told him exactly what I wanted. And he came back with this design, which was nothing that I told him I wanted, but it was a guy supposedly roughly based on me diving into a big Cheers-looking mug of beer. And so I decided, the thing needed a name, or I needed a name. I'd never written a blog before. I knew nothing about it. Not nothing about it, but all these bloggers seem to have their own sort of weird names. And the movie Big Daddy, there's a character in there called Scuba Steve. And since my first name's Steve and they kind of look like a scuba diver, one day I just sort of wrote, that somebody's like, well, who are you? I go, well, I'm Scuba Steve. And didn't think much of it. And then all of a sudden people started writing in a couple of months later, always addressing me as Scuba Steve. So when I started going out and becoming at least a little more known in some of the bars, a lot of these people didn't know me by my face, but they knew me by the name Scuba Steve. So my entire life, I've never had a nickname that stuck until 3 years ago when Scuba Steve somehow now became the name I go by most of the time around Omaha.
And it all started when you started this blog of Hit That Dive.
Right.
Okay, now Hit That Dive, it has taken on sort of a little bit of a life of its own, hasn't it?
It has.
Well, people that don't know, what is Hit That Dive?
Hit That Dive started almost 4 years ago, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, and Tom grew up in Cleveland, so we have, other than the fact that we hate each other's sports teams, we've had probably roughly the same upbringing. Neighborhood bars, places you go in, places around here like Sneaky Pete's where there's a guy named All Day Joe. There's characters everywhere you go. But I was new to Omaha, and I live way out west, and it was funny because we were at the Mustaches for Kids event on Thursday last week, and Tom, you couldn't get out of West Omaha fast enough, which is how I feel, and I live there.
Yeah,
so,
people that don't know that, that I'm not from Omaha, West Omaha, it's a nice area.
Very nice.
But it's a suburbs. It's suburbs. I live in Midtown. I live where there's more of those dives. And,
right.
And, okay, and you're from Pittsburgh, and I'm originally from Cleveland. The bars out there are different than they are here, aren't they?
Well, yes and no. I mean, when you get into South Omaha, which is why I've gravitated down that way, and really that's where I spend a lot of my time when I'm not doing parenting things or coaching, and I have 3 kids. But yeah, I mean, they really, the real Pittsburgh bars, the neighborhood bars, they are part of that community. And in Pittsburgh, if anybody that's listening has ever been there, you can't give directions in Pittsburgh. You can't say go up 3 blocks and make a left, because there aren't 3 blocks. So most of the time growing up, when I would tell people how to get to my house, even when I was 6, I'd say, go to Zona's bar and make a right. And everybody goes, oh, that I know. But to tell them the name of the street or anything else, so we gave directions, even as kids growing up in Pittsburgh, by the neighborhood bars.
Now, when I was doing stand-up, I played Pennsylvania a lot. And one thing I noticed about the Pittsburgh bars, actually pretty much all of Pennsylvania, was that if you went to the bars and they had music, the guys never danced.
No.
The guys in the guys in Pittsburgh don't dance. So the dance would like be crowded with these women, and all the guys would be sitting around drinking beer and talking while the women were dancing, and the guys are just like, yeah, whatever, and then leaving them alone, right?
Well, my grandfather immigrated from Croatia. My grandmother's parents were from Croatia, so I was raised in at least on my mom's side of the family, a very Croatian household. And every Sunday at the Catholic Church, which basically was one giant dive bar of a lot of people getting drunk every Sunday, there's a thing called a cola, and it's all these women, and sometimes a few drunk guys would get involved too, but mostly women in a circle would do these immigrant dances that they've been doing in Croatia and Yugoslavia for hundreds of years. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was all the guys would sit around. My uncles or great uncles or whatever they were in the band that played extremely loudly and really fast. But yeah, it was the women dancing, the guys sitting around drinking, smoking, and that's kind of not how I was raised, but I was raised around that a lot, and that's the sort of atmosphere to this day I still feel far more comfortable in than having to put on a pair of khakis and a golf shirt and go sit somewhere.
The same thing with me. I mean, growing up in Cleveland, on a Saturday, my dad would go down the street to this neighborhood bar where he would go, and he'd bring me along for the ride. I'd be like 5 years old, and I would love it because I got to like sit in the bar stools and just twirl around,
right?
And then there would be a middle class, lower middle class, working blue collar neighborhood, and the guys would go to the bar, have a few beers. They'd bring their kids. Kids might get to play some pinball. Or in Pittsburgh, do they have? In Cleveland, it was very big with bowling. The bowling machines.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned that when I was on your show back at the Fish Fry. Yeah. And I found a picture from a bar in Pittsburgh from 2 years ago when I was there that had a vintage 1950s, and I'll send it to you when I get home, but a 1950s vintage bowling shuffleboard machine. I mean, exactly as you described. Those were more rare than anything. We had a lot of bumper pool tables. We had a lot of pool tables. We had a lot of cheesy pinball machines. My dad ran a bar that had the first sit-down Pac-Man machine in Pittsburgh, so the line was around the block to play that. But yeah, no, it was. There were always sort of the staples of what would be in a place, and a lot of times you'd pick. Well, I wouldn't. I was 10 years old, but I'd try and talk my dad into going to one bar or a different one because I knew they had this game or that game, or the one guy would give me free candy, or I could drink all the Mountain Dew I wanted, and I never felt out of place even as a 10-year-old in a lot of these bars.
Yeah, okay, so which of course now would get your dad behind bars as being an improper father, but going back then, that's how you were raised.
And to this day, I have three kids. I have a 14-year-old who would never step foot in a bar in her life if you paid her. I have a 12-year-old. She occasionally will come around with me. And my 9-year-old son that loves, I won't take him into a place where I haven't been many times before. But there are plenty of places in South Omaha he'll walk in. And a great one is called Andy's Place on 38th and F. There's a woman that works there. She's in her 70s. She's known as Mama Z. Her name's Grace Zimmerer. Her grandson just played for the Huskers as a fullback this year. When she knew my son was coming in, she'd bake cookies, she'd make deviled eggs, she'd, gave him free candy, and it was the same kind of feeling. I didn't feel that he was out of place, much like I didn't feel out of place in some bars in Pittsburgh when I was a kid. There was always a crusty old guy here or there that kind of would give you the stink eye, but I get that to this day, and I'm in my 40s.
You're in your 40s, and you're living out in the suburbs, and you got a nice job, and we'll talk about all that a little bit later on. But but what is it about the dive bars then that appeal to you? I mean, because you got bars a lot closer to your home.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I have bars right down the street that I could walk to. Mm-hmm. But they don't have that feel, and it's one of those things I can never actually. I can put a lot of things into words, but how a bar to me should feel is very hard to describe. I can write about places that I like to go to, and I'll get people that are like, I've never been in that place, but I know exactly what you mean. I sat down, I felt like family. I walked through the door, and everybody gave me the look, and that everybody kind of looks over their shoulder.
You're new. What are you, a cop? Who are you?
Right. Are you a cop? Do you belong in here? Are you going to keep your mouth shut? Are you going to fit in? Are you going to be And I like that. I appreciate that. I like walking to a place for the first time, not knowing anybody. Walking out, I made 5 new friends, 4 of which I don't remember their names when I get there the next time. But over the years around town now, I've found a bunch of places where I can walk in, and maybe I haven't been there in a month, and they'll say, "How's your mom doing?" or "How'd your son's hockey tournament turn out?" And it's people that are there every day because they at least recognize me now and know I'm not there to make fun of it or turn it into some kind of comedy bit. Or a lot of times you read like an Esquire magazine, they'll have top 10 dive bars in the country, but there's always some sort of shtick involved. It's they're not doing it because it's genuine, but it's because it's an easy laugh. And like Michael Moore used to go around and quiz people that clearly didn't know things about economic trading treaties.
Right.
And then laugh at them when they didn't know the answers. And to me, a lot of these Esquire articles, that's what they're doing. They're finding easy targets and making fun of them. And people go, oh, someday I'll be a lowbrow and I'll walk in there and then run back to my champagne and everything else. And I'm the complete opposite. I mean, I want to find these places. I don't necessarily want to be a regular. I've oddly enough never been a regular in any bar in my entire life. But I like discovering new places and meeting new people. And much like you do with this podcast, I like to tell a story of people that can't tell their own story. I don't know that was my intent. And you kind of said this thing has taken on a life of its own, and it really has. You know, I've had people write to me and say, you know, people in their 60s and 70s saying, you know, what you do, you give a voice to people that can't say what it is. It's like to be a person hanging out in these bars. And I'm thinking, I did. It was never my intent. But, you know, at first I sort of just didn't really deal with it. And then after that, I realized this means something to, even if it means something to one person, it started to mean something to me.
Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, Hit That Dive is a blog that you have, right? And hitthatdive.com,
right?
Okay, it is the web address, and it's a blog that you had. Where did this whole idea start to to document these bars that you were going to, and to talk about them like this, to build this following? Was this just sort of a little stupid idea, hobby that just got out of control?
Yes. The short answer is my wife grew up in just north of West Virginia in a small coal mining town. And it is just, and I use this word not in a derogatory way, littered with bars. I mean, you drive up and down the main drag, there's bars everywhere. And so I'll ask my brother-in-law, what's that one like? I don't know. We don't go in there. What's that one like? I don't know. We don't go in there. And I said, somebody should go in all these places. And maybe you have a good experience and maybe you don't, but there should be a list of just what you're going to find when you walk in there, and wanted to do it back in Pennsylvania and never got around to it. And then we had kids and moved to Omaha and moved way out west, and just didn't come across anything interesting. And then one day, it was just a burning idea that I had for years. And the story I've told many times is I was watching one of my kids go off a diving board at a swimming pool, and somebody else's kid jumped off a diving board, and I said, man, that kid hit that dive. And I went, wait, that's the name of this idea that I've had for 10 years. So I took the kids and I walked to a bar by my house. It isn't necessarily a dive, and it's now actually a new name. It was originally the Wet Lounge. It's now infamously Deja Vu, which is where the Nico Jenkins murder victim was leaving from the night last year. So I walked in there with a pen and paper and had no idea what I was going to write about, and I just sat there and started taking notes. And it came out to be, what would I tell my college roommate if he wanted to come to this bar, but I was the first one here? So everything from what the people were like, what the service was like, how much did my $20 get me? Even though I'm not in college anymore, I'm still cautious. When it comes to bars, I prefer a bargain than not.
Well, especially a dive bar. I mean, you're not paying premium prices for a single malt scotch. I mean, give me a beer and a shot of Jack, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, bars in South Omaha, you can still, and this isn't the happy hour price for people that haven't really been to South Omaha. You can get a Busch Light 16-ounce pint and a shot, and the going shot down there is Polish blackberry brandy for $4.65. So a shot and a beer for less than $5, not a happy hour price, the regular price all day, every day.
What is like the good dive bar drink? In other words, I mean, is there, like if you go to, a hoity-toity wine bar,
right?
The sort of things you're supposed to order, or a martini bar,
right?
But if you go to a good dive bar, what should you order?
If you live in Omaha, I would say if you walk into the place and you don't want to stand out, there's one of two ways to go. Busch Light, or not, Busch or Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch Light. Pick your poison that way. A shot of either blackberry brandy, LaRue, or these days lately, Fireball is really creeping its way into even the dive bars. It's sort of that one has sort of made its way. You can find it in upscale places. You can find it in dive bars, or the mini pitcher. If you're in South Omaha and even places, actually, I ran into your brother one day. I was drinking a mini pitcher in Ozzy's pub. That is the drink of choice there. Now, how they'll pick out if you're a regular or not. If they ask you if you want a glass with it, the answer is no. The first time I was in there, I got a mini pitcher, and they said, "Do you want a glass with it?" It was a pitcher, and I said, "Sure." And then I looked around, and everybody else is just drinking right out of the pitcher, and there I am pouring into a glass. And that's the only place I had somebody once come up to me the first time I was in there and say, "Are you the fuzz?" Simply because I was drinking my beer out of a pitcher the wrong way. I was pouring into the glass, and the move of choice is to just drink it straight out of the pitcher.
Okay, now a good dive bar, besides just having Bush Products or whatever, a good dive bar has what? Pinball machine? Pool table?
It may or may not.
Food?
Generally not around here. It doesn't necessarily have to have any sort of criteria. A pinball machine would be nice, especially when I bring a 9-year-old. But if you go into a dive bar with a pinball machine, chances are it'll be sitting there empty. A lot of them have buck hunter, a lot of them have broken stools. And I've come to the point where it's not so much the stuff in the bar doesn't make it; it's the people in the bar that really makes the difference. So you can tell the difference between a handlebar, mustached-wearing hipster in a dive bar that's probably not a dive bar, and a guy. This is a funny story. I've met a lot of people from doing this, and a friend of mine had a barbecue on Saturday, mostly for his friends that are SOB, South Omaha boys. So I brought my wife, who's not a big fan of dive bars. So we get there, and there's probably, 30, 40 Harleys parked out front. We walk around back. Everybody's smoking. Everybody's in leather. Everybody's wearing Harley stuff, and my wife walks in with a Kate Spade purse. She wrote on Twitter later that night, halfway through, she's like, I've never felt so out of my element at all in my entire life. But I would say, take all those people that are at that barbecue, put them in any bar anywhere, and you're going to have a dive bar, unless it's, the Louis Wine Dive out west, which I don't even know exactly what that means. But to me, it's really the people. It's the atmosphere. It's the characters in there. It's the feeling that there's a community in there. Now, not everybody in the community likes each other, and, they consider themselves families, and I've seen some pretty nasty family brawls in real life. My wife's family reunion, somebody pulled a gun one year. So there's a bunch of coal miners in Pittsburgh. So when whiskey and coal miners get together, somebody's going to pull a gun on somebody.
Okay, so like in a dive bar, are you more likely to be in a fight?
Probably not. You can probably find, if you're looking for one, you can find one almost immediately. But I would say, in my experience, 95% of the people in that bar, that's the last thing they want. If somebody comes in and challenges you, you're probably going to find yourself in a fight. I was at a bar, I won't name it just because I like the place, but South Omaha, there's a going away party for another bar that closed. And people were in there having fun, and it was getting late. It was about 1:30, and a bunch of guys came in that didn't really belong in the bar. But, if you come in and you act cool, you're fine. And they were just being obnoxious and loud. So one of the guys said, look, this is a group of friends. You mind leaving? You guys are kind of being obnoxious. And these guys wouldn't leave. So a large biker man escorted them out front and promptly beat the snot out of them. But no, I would say, I've never in Omaha seen a fight in a bar. I've been around ones that, clearly have been, and there's a stabbing in one out in, north on 108th not that long ago, but it wasn't a bar regular. It was somebody that just showed up looking for trouble.
But you've already talked about, like being beaten up, being stabbed, being, a murder that took place. I mean, not necessarily things that bring enjoyment and entertainment to people's minds.
No, but there was a story of somebody running through and licking everybody in a Walgreens last week in town.
Okay, people that don't know the story. Okay, the story. This was a bizarre story. You're right, about somebody just went to Walgreens and just started licking people at random.
Right. Now that could happen in a dive bar too. Now, what happens ultimately? I mean, there are times where alcohol and bad intentions really come out with the worst results possible. But again, and there are bars in town probably more notorious than others for random fights, but your everyday average neighborhood bar, dive bar, whatever you want to call it, fights are few and far between. But again, I mean, ultimately, if somebody's looking for a fight and you walk into a bar like that, you won't have a hard time finding one, but it's not anybody's first priority. Their first priority is to come in, have a few drinks, talk to their friends, at this time of year, watch baseball, and complain about political ads on television.
What would you say to somebody who's listening to this right now and says, dude, you got a drinking problem. You got something, going on here. The way that you're romanticizing these, what a lot of people would consider to be like low-end bars.
And I would say I do romanticize them. I think it's a way of life, and regardless if people are drinking Busch Light or if they're drinking $400 bottles of red wine out in West Omaha, alcohol is part of our culture. It's you go to pubs, and it's funny. A conversation like this wouldn't happen. I used to go to London a lot in England, and I was engaged in Wales and my honeymoon was in Scotland. And the pubs are the community centers of those places. Everything starts and ends at the pub. Whether the people are in there drinking or not doesn't matter. Some people in there, it was funny, though, one time I went into London, I had influenza and ordered tea. And the bartender looked at me and said, "Sir, if you want tea, you can leave." And I thought, whoa. But it's just a different culture. The drinking age is much younger. It's not a bunch of kids on a Friday night trying to steal a bunch of cheap liquor from their parents' cabinets with guzzle it as fast as possible. So, I mean, is it do I romanticize it? I don't try to. I mean, mostly, I've never written in my blog in 4 years about how much I consumed, about how drunk I was or wasn't. To me, I try and write the experience. Now, every now and then I allude to perhaps I had one more than I intended to if somebody's out buying free drinks. But to me, it's become more about the community. You don't have to drink to be in these places, but a lot of people do.
Does the United States, we have a bad attitude towards alcohol? In other words, you mentioned Europe, where it does seem to be more. I was in the Czech Republic. I'm of Czech descent. I was in the Czech Republic there where, beer flows like water.
Right.
I mean, do we have a different attitude towards it here? Maybe not as healthy of an attitude towards alcohol as they do in, Europe?
Yeah, I think we do. I think, there's as a parent, there's two things I could do with the poison in the household. I could hide it somewhere where I hope my kids never find it. And if they find it, they're going to have to make a decision on something they've never had a discussion about before. Mm-hmm. Or I can say, look, this is Drano. There's a sticker on it. This can really do bad things to you. It can, to have that frank, honest discussion at a young age, to sort of anything that's taboo, wet paint, I'm still going to touch it if somebody puts a sign up, probably. It's just the minute there's that enticement. So you can't, I had a friend that I grew up with, very Catholic upbringing. He was told until he's 18, he basically couldn't do anything. When he turned 18, he could do whatever he wanted. Guess what happened the day he turned 18? He went nuts. And, he was going to an Ivy League school that he basically failed out of, ruined his life for about 4 or 5 years till he got it back on track. And I'm not saying that, do I think the drinking age should be younger? That's probably a whole nother discussion. I would say, I would make the driving age 21 and the drinking age 18, but that's me. I just think we go about it the wrong way. We try and encourage kids to sneak around behind their parents' back who will give a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I didn't know what Johnny was doing, but here's a case of Busch Light and I'll get out of here before I see you. As opposed to in France where they're going to sit the kids down at 14, have a glass of wine with dinner and not, not make it this great taboo that somebody's got to run out and steal and then drink too much and get sick and pass out.
It's like the minister's daughter when she goes away to college.
It's exactly like that. And anybody that's listening to this, anybody you can remember from high school or college, you remember that guy, that girl that wasn't allowed to do anything till the day they were. And man, I graduated with a girl from high school, straight A student, scholarship, went to Florida State, one of those two. Within a year and a half, flunked out and was a stripper. And she was captain of the cheerleading squad. But it's this sort of, you can't do anything until you can do whatever you want. And somewhere in between, why don't we talk sense into children from the age of, my son's 9. And he'll see somebody drinking. He's like, Dad, that guy's drunk. He shouldn't be here. And it's you can't hide. And today kids have phones and the internet and iPads and Instagram and Twitter. And, they know about this stuff, whether parents want to admit it or not. So have an honest, frank discussion about what is accepted and what isn't. And the laws. I mean, do I want my kids to be drinking before they're 21? No, because I didn't. I had never had a drink till I turned 21, just because I've never had a speeding ticket. I'm knocking on wood right now. These are.
It's for Micah. Don't worry about it.
Okay, that's fine. All right, good that I didn't blow the deal. No, but it's I'm not saying to raise a bunch of non-law abiding children either. Follow the laws that are there, but even up until that point, have some frank discussions about it, because kids are probably less likely to want to guzzle a bunch of cheap stuff, slow gin from a funnel when they're 16 if they know what the dangers are. My dad, greatest advice he ever told me when I was 18, he said, "Can you drink a bottle of Jack Daniels in half an hour?" He goes, "Absolutely." He goes, "Will it kill you?" "Probably." He goes, "Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should." And those are words that always stuck with me, and I always try and make sure my kids understand that as well. Whether it's drinking or anything else, there's lots of things you can do. Doesn't mean it's the right thing.
Okay, so now when you go to a dive bar, now they're doing this blog.
Right.
When you go to a dive bar, do you just go and enjoy yourself and write about it? Or are you there like a food critic, looking for every little nuance to try to, do a review, to give everybody, kind of a snobbish approach to this dive bar?
I think at first that was kind of the idea. I didn't really have much of an idea. So I would write down, ultimately, I had a friend that does a podcast in town called Worlds of Wayne, and he goes, I've read your stuff. He goes, you're not a critic. He's like, you walk in there and you want to love these things, and you point them out. If there's something wrong, you point it out as a customer and as somebody with, that would do something differently, or if they had the chance to tell the bartender or the bar owner, I would do A, B, and C differently. Now, you have to write for a certain amount of flair. So there are times where, not that I've never made anything up. There are times where I use rather flowery language to get my point across. But, to go in and nitpick a bar owner, the World Herald wrote a story 3 years ago about a bar out west called the Rusty Nail, because I ripped that place up and down. And it was, I wrote such a scathing review, quote unquote, that the World Herald had to go out there and see just how awful this place was. Is that how that was probably the fifth or sixth one I ever wrote, and was still trying to find my footing. Would I write it again that way? It'd probably still be pretty close, just because it was funny, and I had people that wrote in and said, you're dead on. But, there's a fine line. With more followers, back then I probably had 50 people that followed me on Facebook, and I wasn't on Twitter. I've now got closer to 13,000 people. There's a certain amount of, just a level of responsibility that I think I need to, and I'll never pull a punch. If something happens, it happens. If I was in there, I'll try and word it in a way that isn't so ridiculous, but I will also try and, people have come to trust that I'm not going to, I don't get paid to do this. I don't have advertisers. I have nothing to gain. I have nothing to lose. So I might as well just say what's on my mind, which I think is ultimately what people have found refreshing about all of this, is I'm not, brought to you by,
why not? Why don't you make a few bucks on it?
I haven't figured out how. Well, it's funny because your brother told me, he goes, do I think you have $1 million idea? No. But he goes, do you have an idea that could probably make something? Yeah, I think you do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have enough going on with other things that I do. This is, I coach baseball and basketball and volleyball and everything else. So this is, when I have time, hobby. I think if I were making money from doing this, and again, if I could figure out how to do it in a way that doesn't sort of compromise how I do things, and quite frankly, there are just times I don't feel like doing it. I haven't written a review in a couple of months now. I haven't put anything on Facebook in over a week, just because it hasn't struck me. And, there are people that will pump out, have an editorial calendar of what they have to put on social media. And to me, it's more of a feel thing. Last couple of things I put up didn't get nearly the reaction of other things I did. So I don't want to have audience burnout on social media or anything else. I think less lately has been more, and people seem to crave, when I do have something funny to say or a new bar that I went into, that seems to get a better reaction than if I'm trying to pump out something. And I've tried it different ways and try to do something a day. And you just lose this sort of spontaneity of, I was coming back from dropping a kid off at baseball practice, and I did see this bar, and I did wander in there. It wasn't that I wrote down, okay, on Wednesday, May 7th, I will now go into this bar at 7 o'clock. If I were that structured, I don't think it would ever come this far.
Okay, so now you're just doing it kind of a hobby, not making any money. What do you do for a living? How do you make your living?
I'm a PR and social media consultant, and my background is as probably different than anybody would assume a dive bar guy has. I have an undergraduate degree in political science from a school in Pennsylvania called St. Vincent College, which is the home of Rolling Rock Beer, Arnold Palmer, and where the Steelers have their training camp, which is why I picked the school. Latrobe. As the regulars call it, Latrobe. I have a master's degree in public communications from American University in Washington, D.C. My first job out of college, well, first I was a union organizer, and then I was a press secretary on Capitol Hill. I've done everything from be the PR guy for the American Society of Civil Engineers to one of the top spokespeople for the Consumer Electronics Association, which puts on CES every year, the large international trade show, the largest trade show in the world. To I worked for an engineering firm I worked on their FEMA flood mapping project, and I worked in the communities trying to explain to people why their house that had never been flooded is now considered to be in a floodplain, a 100-year floodplain, which means there's a 1% chance annually that it will flood. And to try and just smooth over things with the community. I was moved to Omaha by a large railroad in town, and I figure people can figure that one out, to run their employee communications. They wanted a guy that wasn't from here, somebody from the East that was going to come in, shake things up, do things differently, which is what I was doing, and not everybody was a fan of that. So it was, I will say it was the one time in life I really went for the brass ring when it came to what they were willing to pay and everything else. And my tale from that almost 9 years later is, you hear people say, don't do things for the money. I can back that one up. It was a bad marriage from the start. I met a lot of nice people. I interviewed with everybody from Dick Davidson to Ike Evans to the late Jim Young, who, those that didn't know Jim, one of the greatest CEOs as far as a genuine person that I'd ever been around, was always nice to me even after I was done working there. So that all got me to Omaha, where I worked for 8 years as the National Communications Director for the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity. So I was responsible for trying to explain to people why we still need coal and use coal in this country. So now I kind of do that, but I do a lot more on my own for a bunch of other companies as well.
All right, cool. So hit the dive thing. What amazes me about this, and having read your stuff, is that there is such a connection. People just have a love affair with these dive bars, don't they?
Yeah.
Have you read, Brian? Have you ever read the book, The Tender Bar?
No, but I have that in my Amazon cart because you had mentioned it, and I just haven't ordered it yet because I knew I haven't had time to read it.
Order it. It's a great book, and it's everything that you're talking about here. The regulars, the people, a kid that grew up in that atmosphere, and what the bars of that area are like. Now, have you traveled a lot around the country? Yeah,
in fact, I've done bar reviews in Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Denver, Montana. I haven't done a lot. If I was there for business or for work, I would go in. But yeah, when I'm in town or in a town, I don't want to go to TGI Fridays. I will if it's the only thing around, but I'd rather find something, just something. I'd rather find a place where I can go. And actually, the great one, I know nobody from Columbus, Ohio is going to listen to this one, but I was in Columbus in September, was there for a week, and it was I just wanted to be home. I was gone for a long time, was not having a good time, and had to go to a different hotel. And I saw this place called the Ruckmore Pub. And I thought, boy, that looks like my kind of place. But, you just don't know because there's no reviews of it. I walked in there, and it was a bunch of blue-collar regulars, and we're sitting there, and within 5 minutes, everybody knew my name. They only would call me Nebraska. They had a ring toss game, and for your listeners, it's kind of hard to explain, but you stood about 40 feet away from a peg on a wall. It was on a string from the ceiling, and there was this old guy in there that, man, he could just walk in, let the thing go. Before it would hit on that peg and land, he'd be sitting in his bar stool already drinking his beer. And he came up to me, he goes, Nebraska, you're not leaving here till you get the ring on the hook. So I'm sitting there, and I don't know, 30 minutes goes by, 40 minutes goes by, I can't get it. And he's giving me advice, and the bar's now giving me advice, and different people are coming and going. I let it go, and I hear him yell, you got it! And I look, and that ring went around the peg, and it made this noise, and the entire bar, there's at this point 30 people in there, cheered like I just hit the game-winning shot in the Final Four. And it was really then that it didn't matter where I was. I could have been in Pittsburgh, Omaha. Mm-hmm. I was in Columbus, Ohio.
So are the dive bars around the country that you've been to, are they pretty much all the same?
No two are ever the same. Some maybe remind you of others. It's the people and the personalities in there that are very similar, and they are still hardworking as define it as you will. But they'll still buy a stranger a drink. They'll look you in the eye. If you had to make a deal to buy somebody's used car, a handshake is all you would need. They're not going to judge you by what clothes you walked in, how expensive they are, how much money you have in your pocket. Sometimes if you have more than them, buy them a drink, you got even a better friend. But you're not judged on that. You're judged on a number of things. If you just quietly sit there and mind your own business, most people will leave you alone. But if you can go in there and carry on a conversation, regardless of what part of the country you're in, there's a certain, brotherhood's not the right, I don't know what the right word is, but, there's just this feeling of people, when you're not talking down to anybody, when they're not talking up to you or down to you, that you all just want to sit there and have a conversation with a bunch of people that you might never see again. And all be treated sort of in a way that you thought people should treat one another years ago. That, to me, that's the common theme.
And you sit there and you solve all the problems of the world.
Oh, I've solved everything from budget deficits to cancer to Was the JFK shooting a hoax or not? Have we landed on the moon? I mean, you name the topic. I've solved it with a guy whose name I can't remember over the years, or several of them, or or the infamous "we're all going to chip in and buy this bar tonight," and then that way we never have to leave. And then reality kicks in, and you get home and you go, "What the heck was I thinking?" But I wish those were really the stories I could document well. But once you get into that part of the night and sort of ideas start flowing, especially now, I don't want it to be like I'm now making it a commodity of people and their stories. So I will leave, as close to a reporter as I've ever been. I will leave my reporter hat out in the car at that point and just enjoy myself. Because that's kind of the trap I've run into lately. There are times where, I want to go somewhere and just have fun, or I can go to a new place and review it and sit down, and you go through the whole process again. And sometimes that just becomes a bit, you have to make friends with an entire new bar. I have been lucky that I think I've been able to do that just about everywhere I've gone. I'm unassuming looking enough, and I know enough topics sort of off the top of my head, whether it's sports or I won't talk about politics at a bar, but just about anything else, modern events, music trivia, movie trivia. Certainly the iPhone has been the great equalizer when it comes to bar arguments, but long before that, I'd have friends call me 15 years ago saying, all right, what was this name of this movie? And, I've always had this sort of weird trivial mind, which seems to fit in very well in dive bars.
Is it okay? You see a trivial mind, which brings Cliff Clavin to mind from the TV show Cheers. I mean,
the difference is I'm right. Whereas, I've probably clavened a few things in my day too, but not to the extent I will actually, even way back when I worked on Capitol Hill, for example, I got into a bar discussion about how, Thomas Jefferson died. And so I was going back and forth, and I said, I'm pretty sure I remember reading he died of diarrhea. And this guy kept saying, no, he didn't. No, he had something else. So, boy, you talk about getting busted by today's modern world. I called Congressional Research Service to do the search for me.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I need you to research how Thomas Jefferson died. So they went back and whatever they do long before Google and the internet, and they came back and I got a phone call and she said, well, I have an answer for you. And I go, well, okay, what is it? She goes, well, and I go, okay, before you say anything, I have a theory. I have a theory that Thomas Jefferson died of diarrhea. And she goes, you're pretty much right. But he had some sort of dysentery and there are a bunch of things that played into it. But, even that, I had a bar argument and not that I was that does sound like a Cliff Clavin argument that he died of, a hangnail or something. But I was actually, even then I was right.
You had access to a research on that. But now, as you mentioned, we've all got the cell phone with the Doodle on it, and you can answer all these questions, whether it be, what the record was of the 82 Red Sox or, who the, 27th president was or whatever it might be. I mean, no matter what the argument is, you've got the answer right there, which I think ruins a lot of the beauty of the dive bar.
Except for there's a lot of bars still in town where the 80% of the regulars, if they have a phone, still have a flip phone. So they're still mesmerized. Again, I'll bring in a place called Andy's. I mentioned it already. Most of the people in there are on their flip phones if they're on a phone at all. So they're still pretty enamored by the fact that I have this computer in my pocket that has every answer in it, but there's still places you can go where you'd probably have to go to an old set of encyclopedia on the bookshelf somewhere in the back office to come up with the answer to the argument.
Where do you see, you mentioned the flip phones, smartphones, all of that. That has changed so much over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
Everything has changed so much over the last 10, 15 years. Yet the dive bar seems to pretty much be the same.
It's the last bastion of what I assumed life used to be like long before all this technology. And I, again, had never really put thought into it. I just always have felt comfortable in places like that. But they're a dying breed. We're losing bars in town all the time. There are, whether it's in London, old-time pubs going under. I just drove past the Venice Inn today. Not that that's a dive bar, but that's a whole nother era, a whole nother breed that won't be around in a couple of weeks. For those listening that don't know, it's an old-time Italian steakhouse here in Omaha. It's been around since, I don't know, the 30s.
I used to be a busboy there when I was in high school, and we ate there recently as a farewell dinner, and that's it. It was it had been handed down. And that's true with a lot of these dive bars too, handed down from father to son to father to son. And it got to this generation, and the new generation just didn't want to do it anymore. And so the brothers that owned it just said, "Okay, that's it. We're done."
And whether it's because there's not enough money to be made, and there's Paneras everywhere, and not to pick on Panera, but you have large corporations running, things that just they Walmart everything, any industry, and dive bars and neighborhood bars are no different. And it gets to the land's probably more valuable. The Welcome Inn on 24th Street is going to be closing in June because they're going to put a gas station there. The land's more valuable than the building. I never intended to be sort of a trip down Route 66 either, but over the last couple of years, I'm kind of morphing into more or less documenting some places that won't be around, their attitude, their approach to life, the people in there. I hate to say I'm an old soul because I think that's a dumb statement, but I've just always felt comfortable around people that have a certain value of other people, and I think we're losing that. You
think the dive bars will be dead in 15 years?
I don't think completely dead. A place like Trackside, which is now Tracks on 60th Street, a lady named Karen bought it, totally renovated it, redid it. I don't know if all the regulars are ever going to come back. It certainly is a nice place. They do have
too nice.
It has good chicken, but it's not. It doesn't have that. Geez, you just don't walk in and feel like, I wonder if my grandfather hung out in here. Because you walk in there and you go, well, he wouldn't have hung out in here. I grew up in Croatian clubs and places that your father was in, his father was in, your mother's grandmother was in. Maybe she wasn't allowed to drink, but she was in there, maybe in the back cooking or whatever else. And we're just going to keep losing those all over the country. Some will hang on.
Well, part of it's also because of the homogenization of America.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned, you're Croatian. I'm 100% Czech. Okay. Is your wife Croatian?
My wife is not. She is Scottish, and they don't know
your
what
kids,
else.
So that ethnicity that you grew up in Pittsburgh and me in Cleveland, that ethnicity, and you mentioned South Omaha a lot. South Omaha was a very ethnic part of town, and it still is now. Now it's Hispanic ethnic, whereas before it was Polish and Bohunt,
right,
down there. So it is. As we become more homogenized as a nation, you're going to find fewer and fewer of those dive bars you're talking about.
And it's even to the point where if somebody asked, my grandmother would come up to any of my friends and always ask the same question first: where are your people from? And if the answer wasn't Croatia, she'd say, well, that's okay too. So that's kind of how I was born and raised. Now, if you ask my kids where they're from, they're going to tell you Pittsburgh. They've never lived there.
Yeah.
They've only ever visited there, but they know their heritage as they hear it from me is as a Steeler fan or a guy that ate pierogies on the South Side, or so much as I sort of had romantic fantasies of what it was like for my grandparents. My grandfather came through Ellis Island from Croatia. My kids wonder what it was like to be able to go to a Pirate game whenever you wanted to. You just hopped in the car and drove there. It wasn't a 1,000-mile each way trip to do it. So I like to think that as we're getting homogenized, where at least people are going to be savvy enough to teach their kids at least whatever the heritage that they knew was, and where Horseman's Park, or where, what was I don't even know what the name of the horse track was by Trackside.
Exarban.
That was Exarban.
Exarban, yeah.
To at least take your kids down there and say, look, this used to be part of our community, or Peony Park, which I now know as a Hy-Vee.
Mm-hmm.
They're just things that I make it a point to show my kids, this is what this community, where you were born and raised, where you're not necessarily, they're not from here, but they're born and raised, they consider themselves Nebraskans.
Yeah.
By way of Pittsburgh, where they've never lived, even though they moved here from Washington, D.C. So, yeah, you talk about homogeny. There it is, all in a nutshell in my Honda Accord. But, yeah, no, I think what gets lost is people have these busy lives, and they want to be busy because they are busy for busy's sake, and I have to run this kid to soccer and have to run this kid here, and then I have to make a trip to Walmart, and aren't I a martyr because I'm doing all this? Probably not. No, probably not. You're not. Teach your kids a sense of something. Have them be part of a community, not a bunch of cookie-cutter homes out where I live, which is why I drag my kids to stuff like St. Stan's Day down in South Omaha. My oldest won't go, but my other two walk around with sort of these big bug eyes like, oh, wait, this is in our town. This really happens around here? I just thought, we went to the gumball machine at Lowe's and then went home and sat on the back deck. So, how I got to the point of being some sort of old school romanticist, I don't exactly know. But from the start of Hit That Dive 4 years ago to now, I've become, it's become a bigger part of me more than I ever would have imagined when I first walked out the door to go to the wet lounge with a pen and paper to make fun of the place.
Actually, the whole idea for this podcast sort of came from a dive bar. I just sitting around. I've met some great people, interesting people. Everybody's telling me stories. And I'm thinking, boy, this story needs to be documented. And so take time and go out and have a beer and enjoy the company of others and listen to the stories of others. Hey, if you like this, would you please do me a favor? Would you share it in your social media? Would you tell your friends? Would you spread the word? This is something a little bit different, a little bit unique in all of the millions and billions and trillions of sites and projects going on the internet. Know that you like this one. And spread the word. It's growing rapidly with your support, and I do appreciate it. Until next time, take care and bye, y'all.